Okay. Yeah, I don't have a drink, which sucks, but it's only about 8-ish pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm not sure. Wait, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's only about 7-ish, actually. Okay, anyways. Yeah, it is quickly. So 370. I'm on page 370. I'm just going to read the rest. So, Polk the Purposeful. Young Hickory Polk, unlike old Hickory Jackson, was not an impressive figure. Of middle height, 5 feet 8 inches, lean, white-haired, worn long, gray-eyed, and stern-faced, he took life seriously and drove himself mercilessly into a premature grave. His burdens were increased by an unwillingness to delegate authority. Methodical and hard-working, but not brilliant, he was shrewd, narrow-minded, conscientious, and persistent. What he went for, he fetched, wrote a contemporary. Purposeful in the highest degree, he developed a positive 4-point program, and with remarkable success achieved it completely in less than 4 years. One of Polk's goals was a lower tariff. His Secretary of the Treasury was to be Robert J. Walker. Reese, stop it, baby. Sorry, my dog's here. Okay, I burped also. Anyways. One of Polk's goals was a lowered tariff. His Secretary of the Treasury, Wispy Robert J. Walker, devised a tariff or revenue bill that reduced the average rates of the tariff of 1842 from about 32% to 25%. With the strong support of low-tariff Southerners, the Walker Tariff Bill made its way through Congress, though not without loud complaints from the Clayites, especially New England and the Middle States, who cited that the American manufacturer would be ruined, but these prophets of doom missed the mark. The Walker Tariff of 1846 proved to be an excellent revenue producer, largely because it was followed by boom times and heavy imports. A second objective of Polk was the restoration of the independent Treasury, unceremoniously dropped by the Whigs in 1841. Pro-bank Whigs in Congress raised a storm of opposition, but victory at last rewarded the president's efforts in 1846. The third and fourth points on Polk's must list were the acquisition of California and the settlement of the Oregon dispute. Reoccupation of the whole of Oregon had been promised by Northern Democrats in the campaign of 1844, but Southern Democrats, once they had annexed Texas, rapidly cooled off. Polk, himself a Southerner, had no intention of insisting on the 5440 pledge of his own platform, but feeling bound by the 3 offers of his predecessors to London, he again proposed the compromise line of 49. The British minister in Washington, on his own initiative, brusquely spurned this olive branch. This next move on the Oregon chessboard was up to Britain. Fortunately for peace, the ministry began to experience a change of heart. British anti-expansionists, Little Englanders, were now persuaded that the Columbia River was not after all the St. Lawrence of the West, and that the turbulent American hordes might one day seize the Oregon country. Why fight a hazardous war over this wilderness on behalf of an unpopular monopoly, the Hudson's Bay Company, which had already furred out much of the area Anyhow, early in 1846, the British, hat in hand, came around and themselves proposed the line of 49. Excuse me, I burped again. President Polk, irked by the previous rebuff, threw the decision squarely into the lap of the Senate. The senators speedily accepted the offer and approved the subsequent treaty, despite a few diehard shouts of 54-40 forever, in every foot or not an inch. The fact that the United States was then a month deep in a war with Mexico doubtless influenced the Senate's final vote. Keep hiccuping and burping. Anyways, satisfaction with the Oregon settlement among the Americans was not unanimous. The northwestern states, hotbed of manifest destiny and 50-40ism, joined the anti-slavery forces in condemning what they regarded as a base betrayal by the South. Why all of Texas, but not all of Oregon? Because, retorted the expansionist Senator Boston of Missouri, Great Britain is powerful and Mexico is weak. So Polk, despite all the campaign bluster, got neither 54-40 nor a fight, but he did get something that in the long run was better, a reasonable compromise without a rifle being raised. Misunderstandings with Mexico. Far away, California was another worry of Polk's. He and other disciples of Manifest Destiny had long coveted its verdant valleys, and especially the spacious bay of San Francisco. This splendid harbor was widely regarded as America's future gateway to the Pacific Ocean. The population of California in 1845 was curiously mixed. It consisted of perhaps 13,000 sun-blessed Spanish Mexicans and as many as 75,000 dispirited Indians. There were fewer than 1,000 foreigners, mostly Americans, some of whom had left their consciences behind them as they rounded Cape Horn. Given time, these transplanted Yankees might yet bring California into the Union by playing the Texas game. Polk was eager to buy California from Mexico, but relations with Mexico City were dangerously embittered. Among other friction points, the United States had claims against the Mexicans for some $3 million in damages to American citizens and their property. The revolutionary-riddled regime in Mexico had formally agreed to assume most of this debt, but had been forced to default on its payments. A more serious bone of contention was Texas. The Mexican government, after threatening war if the United States should acquire the Lone Star Republic, had recalled its minister from Washington following annexation. Diplomatic relations were completely severed. Deadlock with Mexico over Texas was further frightened by a question of boundaries. During the long era of Spanish-Mexican occupation, the southwestern boundary of Texas had been the Nueces River, but the expansive Texans, on rather far-fetched grounds, were claiming this more southerly Rio Grande instead. Polk, for his part, felt a strong moral obligation to defend Texas in its claim, once it was annexed. The Mexicans were far less concerned about this boundary quibble than was the United States. In their eyes, all of Texas was still theirs, although temporarily in revolt, and a dispute over the two rivers seemed pointless. Yet Polk was careful to keep American troops out of virtually all the explosive no-man's land between the Nueces and the Rio Grande, as long as there was any real prospect of peaceful adjustment. The Golden Prize of California continued to cause Polk much anxiety. Disquieting rumors, now known to have been ill-founded, were circulating that Britain was about to buy or seize California, a grab that Americans could not tolerate under the Monroe Doctrine. In a last desperate throw of dice, Polk dispatched John Slidell to Mexico City as minister late in 1845. The new envoy, among other alternatives, was instructed to offer a maximum of $25 million for California and territory to the east, but the proud Mexican people would not even permit Slidell to present his insulting proposition. Excuse me. American blood on American soil? A frustrated Polk was now prepared to force a showdown. On January 13, 1846, he ordered 4,000 men under General Zachary Taylor to march from the Nueces River to the Rio Grande, provocatively near Mexican forces. Polk's presidential diary reveals that he expected at any moment to hear of a clash. When none occurred after an anxious wait, he informed his cabinet on May 9, 1846, that he proposed to ask Congress to declare war on the basis of 1. Unpaid claims, and 2. Slidell's rejection. These, at best, were rather flimsy pretexts. 2 cabinet members spoke up and said that they would feel better satisfied if Mexican troops should fire first. That very evening, as fate would have it, news of bloodshed arrived. On April 25, 1846, Mexican troops had crossed the Rio Grande and attacked General Taylor's command, with a loss of 16 Americans killed or wounded. Polk, further aroused, sent a vigorous war message to Congress. He declared that despite all our efforts to avoid a clash, hostilities had been forced upon the country by the shedding of American blood upon American soil. A patriotic Congress overwhelmingly voted for war, and enthusiastic volunteers cried, "Ho for the halls of the Montezumas," and "Mexico or death." Inflamed by the war fever, and even anti-slavery Whig bastions melted and joined with the rest of the nation, though they later condemned Jimmy Polk's war. As James Russell Lowell of Massachusetts lamented, "Massachusetts, God forgive her, she's a-kneelin' with the rest." In his message to Congress, Polk was making history, not writing it. Like many presidents with ambitious foreign policy goals, he felt justified in bending the truth if that was what it took to bend a reluctant public toward war. If he had been a historian, Polk would have explained that American blood had been shed on the soil that Mexicans had good reason to regard as their own. A gangling, rough-featured Whig congressman from Illinois, one Abraham Lincoln, introduced certain resolutions that requested information as to the precise spot on American soil where American blood had been shed. He pushed his spot resolutions with such persistence that he came to be known as the Spotty Lincoln, who could die of spotted fever. The more extreme anti-slavery agitators of the North, many of them Whigs, branded the president a liar, Polk the mendacious. Did Polk provoke war? California was an imperative point in this program, and Mexico would not sell it at any price. The only way to get it was to use force or wait for an internal American revolt. Yet delay seemed dangerous, for the claws of the British lion might snatch the ripening California fruit from the talons of the American eagle. Grievances against Mexico were annoying yet tolerable. In later years, America endured even worse ones, but in 1846, patience had ceased to be a virtue, as far as Polk was concerned. Bent on grasping California by fair means or foul, he pushed the quarrel to a bloody showdown. Both sides, in fact, were spoiling for a fight. Feisty Americans, especially southwestern expansionists, were eager to teach the Mexicans a lesson. The Mexicans, in turn, were burning to humiliate the bullies of the North. Possessing a considerable standing army, heavily overstaffed with generals, they boasted of invading the United States, freeing the black slaves, and lassoing the whole regiments of Americans. They were hoping that the quarrel with Britain over Oregon would blossom into a full-dress war, as it came near doing, and further pin down the hated Yanqui. A conquest of Mexico's vast and arid expanses seemed fantastic, especially in view of the bungling American invasion of Canada in 1812. Both sides were fired by moral indignation. The Mexican people could fight with the flaming sword of righteousness, for had not the insolent Yankee picked a fight by polluting their soil? Many earnest Americans, on the other hand, sincerely believed that Mexico was the aggressor. The mastering of Mexico. Polk wanted California, not war, but when war came, he hoped to fight it on a limited scale and then pull out when he had captured the prize. The death-ruined Mexican director Santa Anna, then exiled with his teenage bride in Cuba, let it be known that if the American blockading squadron would permit him to slip into Mexico, he would sell out his country. Incredibly, Polk agreed to this discreditable intrigue, but the double-crossing Santa Anna, once he returned to Mexico, proceeded to rally his countrymen to a desperate defense of their soil. American operations in the Southwest and in California were completely successful. In 1846, General Stephen W. Kearny led a detachment of 1,700 troops over the famous Santa Fe Trail from Fort Leavenworth to Santa Fe. This sun-baked outpost, with its drowsy plazas, was easily captured. But before Kearny could reach California, the fertile province was won. When war broke out, Captain John C. Fremont was the dashing explorer, just happened to be there with several dozen well-armed men. In helping to overthrow Mexican rule in 1846, he collaborated with American naval officers and with the local Americans who had hoisted the banner of the short-lived California Bear Flag Republic. General Zachary Taylor, meanwhile, had been spearheading the main thrust. Known as Old Rough and Ready because of his iron constitution and incredibly unsoldierly appearance, he sometimes wore a Mexican straw hat. He fought his way across the Rio Grande into Mexico. After several gratifying victories, he reached Buena Vista. There, on February 22nd to 23rd, 1847, his weakened force of 5,000 men was attacked by some 20,000 march-weary troops under Santa Anna. The Mexicans were finally repulsed with extreme difficulty, and overnight Zachary Taylor became the hero of Buena Vista. One Kentuckian was heard to say that old Zach would be elected president in 1848 by spontaneous combustion. Sound American strategy now called for a crushing blow at the enemy's vitals, Mexico City. General Taylor, though a good leader of modest-sized forces, could not win decisively in the semi-deserts of northern Mexico. The command of the main expedition, which pushed inland from the coastal city of Veracruz early in 1847, was entrusted to General Winfield Scott. A handsome giant of a man, Scott had emerged as a hero from the War of 1812 and had later earned the nickname Old Fuss and Feathers because of his resplendent uniforms and strict discipline. He was severely handicapped in the Mexican campaign by inadequate numbers of troops, by expiring enlistments, by a more numerous enemy, by mountainous terrain, by disease, and by political backbiting at home. Yet he succeeded in battling his way up to Mexico City by September 1847 in one of the most brilliant campaigns in American military annals. He proved to be most distinguished general produced by his country between the Revolution and the Civil War. Fighting Mexico for peace. Polk was anxious to end the shooting as soon as he could secure his territorial goals. Accordingly, he sent along with Scott's invading army the chief clerk of the State Department, Nicholas P. Trist, who, among other weaknesses, was afflicted with an overfluid pen. Trist and Scott arranged for an armistice with Santa Anna at the cost of $10,000. The wily dictator pocketed the bribe and then used the time to bolster his defenses. Negotiating a treaty with a sword in one hand and a pen in the other was ticklish business. Polk, disgusted with his blundering envoy, abruptly recalled Trist. The worldly diplomat then dashed off a 65-page letter explaining why he was not coming home. The president was furious, but Trist, grasping a fleeting opportunity to negotiate, signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on February 2nd, 1848, and forwarded it to Washington. The terms of the treaty were breathtaking. They confirmed the American title to Texas and yielded the enormous area stretching westward to Oregon and the ocean and embracing coveted California. This total expanse, including Texas, was about one-half of Mexico. The United States agreed to pay $15 million for the land and to assume the claims of its citizens against Mexico in the amount of $3,250,000. Polk submitted the treaty of the Senate. Although Trist had proved highly annoying, he had generally followed his original instructions, and speed was imperative. The anti-slavery Whigs in Congress, dubbed Mexican Whigs or Conscience Whigs, were denouncing this damnable war with increasing heat. Having secured control of the House in 1847, they were even threatening to vote down supplies for the armies in the field. If they had done so, Scott probably would have been forced to retreat, and the fruits of victory might have been tossed away. Another peril impended. A swelling group of expansionists, intoxicated by manifest destiny, was clamoring for all of Mexico. If America had seized it, the nation would have been saddled with an expensive and vexatious policing problem. Far-seeing Southerners policing problem. Far-seeing Southerners like Calhoun, alarmed by the mounting anger of anti-slavery agitators, realized that the South would do well not to be too greedy. The treaty was finally approved by the Senate, 38-14. Oddly enough, it was condemned by both those opponents who wanted all of Mexico and by opponents who wanted none of it. Victors rarely pay an indemnity, especially after a costly conflict has been forced on them. Yet Polk, who had planned to offer $25 million before fighting the war, arranged to pay $18,250,000 after winning it. Cynics have charged that the Americans were pricked by guilty consciences. Apologists have pointed proudly to the Anglo-Saxon spirit of fair play. The decisive factor was the need for haste. While there was still a reasonable Mexican government to carry out the treaty and before political foes in the United States, notably the anti-slavery zealots, sabotaged Polk's expansionist program. Profit and loss in Mexico. As wars go, the Mexican War was a small one. It cost some 13,000 American lives, but most of them taken by disease. But the fruits of the fighting were enormous. America's total expanse, already vast, was increased by about 1/3, an addition even greater than that of the Louisiana Purchase. A sharp stimulus was given to the spirit of manifest destiny, for as the proverb has it, the appetite comes with eating. The Mexican War proved to be the blood-splattered schoolroom of the Civil War. The campaigns provided priceless field experience for most of the officers destined to become leading generals in the forthcoming conflict, including Captain Robert E. Lee and Lieutenant Ulysses S. Grant. The military academy at West Point, founded in 1802, fully justified its existence through the well-trained officers. Useful also was the Navy, which did valuable work in throwing a crippling blockade around Mexican ports. A new academy at Annapolis had just been established by Navy Secretary and historian George Bancroft in 1845. The Marine Corps, in existence since 1798, won new laurels, and to this day sings in its stirring hymn about the hails of Montezuma. The army waged war without defeat and without a major blunder, despite formidable obstacles and a half-dozen or so achingly long marches. Chagrined British critics, as well as other foreign skeptics, reluctantly revised upon their estimate of Yankee military prowess. Opposing armies, moreover, emerged with increased respect for each other. The Mexicans, though poorly led, fought heroically. At Chapultepec, near Mexico City, the teenage lads of the military academy there, Los Niños, perished to a boy. Long-memoried Mexicans have never forgotten that their northern enemy tore away about half of their country. The argument that they were lucky not to lose all of it, and that they even paid something for their land, has scarcely lessened their bitterness. The war was also marked an ugly turning point in relations between the United States and Latin America as a whole. Hitherto, Uncle Sam had been regarded with some complacency, even friendliness. Henceforth, he was increasingly feared as the Colossus of the North. Suspicious neighbors to the south condemned him as a greedy and untrustworthy bully who might next despoil them of their soil. Most ominous of all, the war re-aroused the snarling dog of the slavery issue, and the beast did not stop yelping until drowned in the blood of the Civil War. Abolitionists assailed the Mexican conflict as one provoked by the Southern slavocracy for its own evil purposes. As James Russell Lowell had Hosea Biglow drawl in his Yankee dialect, they just want this Californy so's to lug new slave states into abuse ye and a scorn ye and a plunder ye like sin. Okay. In line with Lowell's charge, the bulk of the American volunteers were admittedly from the South and Southwest, but as in the case of the Texas Revolution, the basic explanation was proximity rather than conspiracy. Quarreling over slavery extension had also erupted on the floors of Congress. In 1846, shortly after the shooting started, Polk had requested an appropriation of $2 million with which to buy a peace. Representative David Wilmot of Pennsylvania, fearful of the Southern slavocracy, introduced a fateful amendment. It stipulated that slavery should never exist in any of the territory that be wrested from Mexico. The fiercely contested Wilmot Amendment twice passed the House, but not the Senate. Southern members, unwilling to be robbed of prospective slave states, fought the restriction tooth and nail. Anti-slavery men, in Congress and out, battled no less bitterly for the exclusion of slaves. The Wilmot Proviso never became federal law, but it was eventually endorsed by the legislatures of all but one of the free states, and it came to symbolize the burning issue of slavery in the territories. It was this issue of slavery's extension into the newly acquired lands in the West, more than any other, that drove the broadest and hottest wedge between North and South. Seen in historical perspective, the opening shots of the Mexican War were the opening shots of the Civil War. President Polk left the nation in the splendid physical heritage of California and the Southwest, but also the ugly moral heritage of a toxic slavery dispute. Mexico will poison us, said the philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson. Even the great champion of the South, John C. Calhoun, had prophetically warned that Mexico is to us the forbidden fruit. The penalty of eating it would be to subject our institutions to political death. Mexicans could later take some satisfaction in knowing that the territory wrenched from them by sword and musket proved to be a venomous apple of discord that would well be called Santa Anna's revenge. There's a Makers of America thing that I have to do so much homework, so I cannot read it. Okay, yay!